Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Principal of the Year Hill Day training webinar for our upcoming Capitol Hill Day on September 25th. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. We are going to go ahead and get started with the webinar here. So this webinar is being recorded, so if folks need to access it afterwards, we will definitely make that link available. We will also make the PowerPoint presentation available, so there are a number of links to resources within this presentation, but don't worry about jotting down notes furiously as we're talking. It will be available to you afterwards, so you can click through and access all of those resources afterwards. So everybody, just a note to get started, everybody is on mute right now. Everybody will be muted until we get to the Q&A portion of the webinar, and then we will take everybody off mute. So when we get there, if you have a question, feel free to ask us then. There's also a chat box feature, so if you want to type in a question while we're running through things here, you can certainly do that as well. So now let me turn it over to Amanda Carhughes to get us started.
Great, thanks, Greg, and thank you for all of you joining us this afternoon, and let me be the first of many who will congratulate you for being selected as the Principal of the Year for your state. We are looking forward to seeing you all next month as part of the Principal Institute, and our Hill Day is a really big part of that program. I want to go ahead to the next slide, I think. Just to give an overview of some of the people who you're going to meet, this is the entire NASSP advocacy team. I'm Amanda Carhughes. I'm the Director of Advocacy, and I'm joined on the webinar today by Zach Scott, our Senior Advocacy Manager for Federal Engagement Outreach, serves as our primary lobbyist on Capitol Hill and other DC venues, and Greg Waples, who's our NASSP Senior Advocacy Manager focusing on state engagement and outreach, and does most of our grassroots advocacy, and you'll hear from him when we send action alerts. So as I mentioned, we will be going to Capitol Hill on Tuesday, September 25th. And just want to reiterate that this is a really important part of the Principal Institute and of our advocacy program and what we're trying to achieve to ensure that the principal's voice is heard in federal policy making. We try and bring principals to Capitol Hill whenever they're in town, but we find that they are very receptive and really enjoy meeting with the state principals of the year in particular. First of all, it's an opportunity for them to congratulate you on your successes, learn more about the role of the principal, what it is that you do in your school each day, and what you've done to achieve success and earn the recognition that you've received as a state principal of the year. But we also really hope that the talking points and the issues that we talk about during this webinar will resonate with you, and that you will feel a desire to actually advocate on some of these issues that we feel are important to school leaders and should be important to you and the students that you serve. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Greg, who's going to talk a little bit more about the logistics of our Capitol Hill Day, and then later on in the webinar, you'll hear more from Zach about the federal policy issues and our specific talking points, and I'll just be listening in to assist with questions at the end.
Okay, great. So jumping into those Capitol Hill meeting logistics a little bit more, here's our agenda for what we're going to be running through in the first half of the webinar. So first point here is scheduling your Hill meetings. So as folks are setting up these meetings in that Google document that I shared with everybody, keep in mind that your Hill meetings can last anywhere from 10 minutes to a full 30 minutes or longer, depending on the member of Congress's schedule. So give yourself ample time to get between offices, especially if some of your meetings are going to be taking place on either the House side or Senate side and you need to get back and forth in between. Definitely leave at least 15 minutes there in between those meetings that are getting scheduled to make sure that you have enough time to do that. So everybody should have this Google document that I've shared in the Hill Day memo, and I know I've been communicating with a number of you thus far about this, and I think almost everybody has scheduled most of their meetings at this point. But if you haven't yet, please get into the Google document and take a look at the scheduler contact information for both of your senators and your representative, and you will be able to find that information, send them an email, and set up the meetings for the Capitol Hill Day. So if you're having any trouble at all with following up with folks in there, please just shoot me an email and let me know. We want to make sure we get all these meetings scheduled as soon as possible, especially since schedules on the Hill can fill up very quickly. We want to make sure that you folks have enough time to get your picture with your member of Congress. They will be very excited to take a picture with you and to meet with you to discuss the issues. So definitely want to get those set up. So just quickly here, I'm going to jump to that scheduling Google document. So as I said, most folks have seen this already, but if you haven't, please get in here and take a look. You'll notice the green columns on the right-hand side are where you will enter information about your meetings that you're getting set up. So please enter in the meeting time where it's when the meeting is going to be taking place, and also the location. So that will be a room number and one of the Senate or House office buildings that you'll put in that column there. You can also add in any notes about the meeting that we should be aware of, or anything else that you need to let us know as you're getting these set up. Okay, so moving to talk a little bit about the actual Hill Day. This is a map that you're seeing on screen here of the Capitol complex. So you'll see that all of the House office buildings are on the left-hand side and all of the Senate office buildings are on the right. There are tunnels between the buildings on both sides, so you will not need to go through security multiple times when we all arrive for the Hill Day. But you will need to come outside and go across back and forth to the House and Senate side. So just keep that in mind again in terms of leaving yourself enough time to get to meetings. Okay, so now jumping into the context of the meetings a little bit more, I'm going to turn it over to Zach.
Great, thanks, Greg. And as Amanda mentioned before, my name is Zach Scott. I serve as our Senior Manager of Federal Engagement and Outreach. So I do these meetings on the regular, and we're going to make sure you guys are all experts by the time you're up there on Capitol Hill, and it'll go swimmingly. So I don't want anybody to be nervous or anything like that. We'll have a really good training session for everybody as well. But with this webinar and the training that we're all going to give you guys, everybody's going to be super prepared for these meetings. They're going to go really easily. And as Greg said before, members, Greg and I mentioned, members are going to be really happy to see all of you. POY is a lot of members love to meet their POY. They're going to be very excited. But first, we want to kind of knock down some myths about these Hill meetings that you might have or you may have heard from some other folks. So one of the first myths we're going to talk about is that practitioners' voices don't really matter in crafting federal policy. One that we hear quite a lot from folks is they don't think that their voice matters at all, that members already have their mind made up on certain issues, or that they are only listening to big dollar donors and things like that. I can assure you that is not true. Members really are always looking to hear from constituents. You are really the person that is helping to put that person into office. Kind of you're actually serving as their boss a little bit. That is really what the role of a constituent is. And they really need to hear from educators. To be quite honest, there aren't that many educators in Congress. Many of them were business people before, things like that. So the only real knowledge they have of school is in school, or a principal or an educator, when they went to school. And for many of them, that was a long, long time ago. So they really do need expert opinions, and there's nobody better than that than to hear from the practitioners themselves. And as I said before, very few of them have ever even been educators, let alone principals. There are very few principals on the Hill, so they have such a hard time knowing what that job really entails and what it is needed to do that job and what is necessary to be successful at that job. So your voice is something truly unique that they don't get to hear a lot about, especially from a firsthand account. I mean, they hear it from me once in a while, but I have never been a principal myself either. So you're getting a firsthand account from all of you is very, very powerful and can go a long way in influencing your policymakers. The second myth I want to talk about quickly is that meeting with a staff member is not as important as meeting with a legislator. So members of Congress are busy. We know this. As a principal, I'm sure you can relate. You're getting pulled in every which way all the time. That's kind of what it's like for a member of Congress. They may say that they have a meeting scheduled with you. The member may get pulled out for whatever reason, votes, committee, emergencies, who really knows. So you may end up meeting with a staffer. I want you to understand right now that those meetings with staff are very important. Most of the time, just as important as a meeting with a member of Congress. I worked on Capitol Hill for over 4 years. I was a staffer for a long time, and when I had those one-on-one meetings with practitioners, even without my boss there, they really give you a chance to, one, ask the questions that staffer wants to ask so that they can hear from you directly and kind of get that from you. And also, the staffer covering that specific policy issue, they may actually have more of a knowledge of the issues that you're covering than the member themselves. So they're the ones that are going to be taking what you say back to the member, and it may have a bigger impact on them. And when that happens, they can then go to the member and share that with them. And that member hired them because they trust them. That's why they're working in that office. So meeting with a staffer is just as important as meeting with a legislator. I know it's not as exciting for everybody. Everybody wants to meet with their legislator. Fingers crossed that many of you are going to get meetings with your legislators. But we do want to reiterate that just because you don't treat it as just meeting with the staffer. These are still very important meetings that can really lead to some positive growth moving forward in some really good ways that you can drive some positive change on Capitol Hill here. And next, we're going to talk about really quickly how you can go maximize your influence. How should you prepare for a meeting, what you should do during the meeting, and what you should do after the meeting. So we'll kind of highlight these parts next. First thing is before your meeting. I know many of you have your students and you always tell them to do their homework. This is time for you to do your homework. We're going to give you a lot of materials that will help you out, that will provide you some background information, and we'll also be giving materials for you to leave in the office. Now, with that being said, you want to review those materials beforehand so that you know what you're talking about. You don't want to go in there kind of flying blind a little bit. Now, with that being said, you don't need to be an expert. Nobody expects you to be a policy expert. We just want you to know enough to be dangerous here. So making sure that you review your NASSP materials is really important. Prepare. I'm sorry, my apologies here, but it does say on the slide, I kind of forgot to mention this. We have a lot of our materials on our website, on our NASSP Policy and Advocacy Center website, which will be really helpful for you, and we will provide others as well. Prepare examples, personal stories, data, things like that. That's really important. Members love stories. They're the way that it makes it easier for them to tell what they're, to understand what you're saying. It's a good way for them to go talk about it later. If you go in there with data numbers, that's also really important to see hard data on what's influencing them and what's influencing your school. But stories are probably the most important thing you can give a member. People just remember stories better. They flow better, they stay in their head a little easier, and they just have a bigger impact. So stories are really important. So trying to come up with some of your own stories on some of these issues that we're talking about. Maybe you have a great story about mental health and you want to share that with a member. That can be great. Or a great story about how professional development really drove your faculty and your teachers to become better at what they do and really support their students. Things like that go a long way in sharing those things with members. Do a little background and research on the member themselves. That way that when you go in there, you can kind of plan out what you want to say to them. Maybe in the past, they supported an initiative that helped your school and you can thank them for that. Or you said, hey, that was a really good starting point. We also want to go here. Some things to keep an eye out for that are really easy to kind of help you in doing your own little research on that member. Other committee assignments. Are they on the House Education and Workforce Committee? That means that they'll be a little more receptive most of the time to education issues. Just because they're not on there doesn't mean they won't be. But that's a good way to kind of a jumping off point. Are they on the Appropriations Committee? Do they decide where the money goes? That's kind of one of the A committees, as they call it, one of the best committees you could be on. If so, you really want to hit home on Title II, Title IV, other parts of the Every Student Succeeds Act that are being funded by the federal government through appropriations. Those are really important to hit with those offices. Press clips. Members of Congress love nothing more than being covered by the media, especially when whatever press clips they put out themselves. So every member of Congress usually has on their website a press page that you can go to. Go check that out. Does it highlight pieces of education there and things like that? Social media posts, that's another big one for them. What are they posting on their social media? Every member of Congress has a social media now, Twitter and Facebook mostly. I think it'd be hard pressed to find anyone that doesn't have both of those, so that's really important. And one more thing to mention is we are going to throw a lot of issues at you guys there. you may want to prioritize kind of your top 2 or 3. Are there 2 of them that you're really strongly, that you feel strongly about, or that you can share really good stories about? We'll get into this a little more in the training when you are all in DC about what we call our elevator pitch for members of Congress, because you may have to speak to them very quickly. You may not have a lot of time with them, but we'll share that with you a little more. So just try to find the issues that we highlight later on that you may feel the strongest about or the most comfortable talking about. Also, before your meeting, find a piece of legislation, and this kind of goes with what I just said, based on a resolution, a letter that the legislators worked on that you can kind of ask them about. The ask is the big part. Whenever you go into an office, you need to have an ask. If you don't ask for something, there's no way they're going to give it to you. So figure out what exactly you're asking them for. We'll go into that a little later too as we discuss the next piece here. I think we can go to the next slide. Practice your pitch is kind of something else we talked about. As I was just mentioning before, prepare talking points for each issue. There may be something you're more comfortable in. Have more for that. That's totally fine. Don't assume the legislator or the staffer knows that issue that well. Many members of Congress cover a lot of issues, especially if they're not on that committee. They may have a little bit less knowledge about education. As I said, not many of them have been educators. The staffers may know a little more, but be prepared to go in there and kind of start from the ground up. And then when you start there, just kind of gauge what they do know, and then you can kind of go into more detail or less detail depending on how much information that office has. And as I just mentioned, prepare your ask. That is the most important part. Are you asking them to co-sponsor a bill? Is it to support funding for a program? Is it voting against a bill? Which we will mention, we do have some pieces of that mentioned in there. But knowing what you're going to ask them to do is probably the most important part of the meeting. If you, as I said before, if you don't ask, they're not going to do anything. Otherwise, they're going to say, oh, what a great 10-minute meeting with my POY. They didn't really want anything, so that was really easy. Unless you ask for something, there's no way they're going to know that you want it. And that's really important for Congress when you go into these meetings. So just keep in mind what the ask is going to be. We'll have a whole nice page printed out with you with these kind of asks on there. And it's just going to be up to you to kind of form them in a way that has a good pitch followed by the ask for it. I think we have one more slide on before your meeting before I pass it off to Greg. When you go into these meetings, you want to be memorable. Staffers especially, well, staffers and members both, are going to have a lot of meetings during the day, sometimes between 5 to 10 meetings. I know at one point, I think my record was about 9 in a day. So when there's 9 meetings in a day, you really, it's kind of tough to remember everything. I kind of all flow into one. I'm sure many of you have days like this at the school as well. So what you want to do is tell those stories I mentioned before. Find a way to make yourself memorable. Maybe it's also just saying something as simple to the staffer, which Greg will talk about a little bit. Maybe they went to your school. Maybe they know someone who went to your school. Just finding ways that you can be memorable. That, like I said, a big part about that is your preparation beforehand and making sure you illustrate your ask in a very clear and understandable way for them. And just as we mentioned before, make sure you're familiar with everything in the folder that we're going to send you with to discuss. We don't need you to be railing off numbers of every funding program or anything like that. But what we do need you to do is to know what the program does, or to know why the program is important, or how it can help your school and how it can help your students. That's really what's important there, is how do you make sure that those things are being helpful like that. So just knowing what's in the folder and being prepared really is going to give you guys a great leg up when you start these meetings. And now I'm going to pass it back to Greg here so we can kind of talk about what you do with that information during the meeting itself.
Okay, great. Thanks, Zach. So during your meeting, a couple of key points here. Seems pretty apparent, but arrive early. Make sure you're not running late. Obviously, members are running on a very tight schedule. They have votes to keep. So we need to make sure that we're on time for all of these meetings. Another point, introduce yourself at the front to the staffer who greets you in the office. Say who you're meeting with and give them your business card. That's a good first step for all of these meetings that will be taking place. Another point I'd add here is just know the context of the meeting. So I know as many of you are scheduling these, you're finding out that the schedulers and the staffers are saying that the member or the senator may be able to pop in for a photo op or just meet with for a few minutes. So it may be the case that you have a photo opportunity with the senator or member, and you're able to do maybe a quick 30-second pitch to them about the main issue that you want to talk about, and then they may have to leave for a vote. And then after that, you'll likely be spending more significant time actually meeting with the staff member and getting a chance to talk with them more in depth about policy. So just have an idea of what the context of the meeting is in mind, so you know if you need to give a quick 30-second elevator pitch to your member of Congress, and then you'll be talking more in depth with the staff member. Okay, a couple other points during your meeting. Make a connection with the member or senator. So this is really important to make that personal connection. So maybe ask them, where did they go to middle school or high school? Most of the staffers that work in that office are also from the state or district. So you can talk to them a little bit about your hometown and your school. Maybe you have a mutual connection there. But making that personal connection with folks about your state, your district, your school, where you're from, something like that will really help set the meeting off on the right foot and give you a better opportunity to make a connection on policy once you've made that personal connection as well. Don't be afraid to ask questions and assess their level of knowledge and understanding about the issues you present. So that's both true for members of Congress and staff. So some staffers especially may not be really knowledgeable about all of the education issues you might be talking about, whether it's Title II or Title IV of the Every Student Succeeds Act and why that funding is so important to educators. The staffers may not be completely versed on that. Many of them probably will be, but don't hesitate to ask a question like, are you familiar with what Title II funding of the Every Student Succeeds Act does? And if they're not, then you can give them a personal story or tell them a little bit more about that. So don't just assume that all the folks you're talking to know everything, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Just to reiterate what Zach was saying, don't forget about your ask. They're waiting for it. The reason they're taking these meetings, they're completely expecting you to make a policy ask and to ask them to vote a certain way or to take a certain position on an issue. So we will be talking a little bit more about our policy priorities here in a second, but definitely don't forget to work those into your conversations. Also during your meeting, talk about specific examples of how the issue you are discussing impacts your school, your teachers, and your students. So this really gets back to the personal story. If you're able to draw that connection to your school specifically, your staff and your students, that's going to be the most impactful for members. Be prepared to answer difficult questions and defend your position on the issues. So if you don't have an answer to a very technical question, that's okay. You can always say, I don't know, let me get back to you. So if you're not sure about one of those issues, feel free to just let them know that you'll follow up with them, or a member of NASSP staff will follow up with them. And you can just flag for us that that member's office or the member themselves had a question about a particular issue, and we're happy to provide that backup support and to do a little bit more research on policy to make sure that they get the answer they need on whatever the question was. So keep an eye on time and make sure to cover all of your priorities in the time that's available. Again, most of these meetings will last 30 minutes tops, so make sure you're sticking to your talking points and getting to the materials that you're hoping to cover. Leave the folder of materials with the staff. And if you don't talk about the contents of the folder, make sure that they know what's in it instead of just handing it to them. So you'll all have a folder of materials with a few fact sheets, but be sure to hand that to the staff, leave it with them, and explain a little bit about what's in there in terms of the research and facts that they can follow up with on these issues when they have time to look into the issue a little bit more deeply after your meeting. Finally, thank the staffer or legislator for their time and ask them if they would like any follow-up time, and if you can take a picture with that person that you just met with. So another really important point here, definitely get those photos, especially if it's with a member or a senator, but even if it's just a meeting with a staff member, still get the photo, and that will be really valuable after your meeting as well. So immediately after your meeting, we want to make a big social media presence out of POY 2018. So it's very important that you're having these meetings in person, but we're also going to be amplifying this via NASSP's social media channels. There will also be an action alert that's going out much more broadly to our membership and lists of advocates, and folks will all be tweeting around these same hashtags that you will be using. So after your meetings, be sure to send out that picture on Twitter and let folks know that you just met with your member of Congress. Maybe raise a couple of the issues that you just discussed with the member in some tweets and social media afterwards. And also try to tweet directly at the member of Congress, or link their handle in the tweet that you send out. This will make it much more likely that the member will retweet you, and that will help amplify your message as well. And then following up after the meeting, within a few days, send a thank you email as soon as possible to the staffer you met with. In that email, you should reiterate your key points and asks. And you should also offer to be a resource to them. So if they need to have further discussion on the issues that you discussed, let them know that you're available to talk about that. And another best practice would be to invite them to come visit your school. So many of these members and senators are always looking for opportunities to get out there into the community, especially to be seen at schools. So this is a great opportunity for you to do that, and to invite them to come visit your school sometime and shadow you and discuss more of the issues that you talked about during the meeting. In the next few days after the meeting, continue to share those pictures and your experience on social media and also with your local media. So NASSP will provide you with a press release template that you can use to highlight the meeting that you did on Capitol Hill. And your state principal associations can also help out with this. But it's a great best practice after these meetings take place to get this out to your local newspapers and TV stations. Folks are going to be very interested that the principal of the year for your state met with their member and their senators on Capitol Hill. So definitely plan on getting this information out to those media outlets after your meeting takes place. Follow up with your members' local offices as well, and keep the relationship going. So you can certainly connect with the district offices for your member and senators, and you should look towards becoming an advocate in the future. So many of our past principals of the year have been key advocates for NASSP for years to come. We often use folks to speak on panel events and to be key contacts for members of Congress. So I would really suggest looking at this first opportunity, where if this is the first opportunity for you meeting with your member, as the beginning point of a relationship, and we would encourage you to seek to stay involved with that person moving forward. Lastly, complete the NASSP Hill Day meeting report. So this, we have a report form set up here that you'll be able to access in the PowerPoint presentation that I send around, but just some basic questions about what was discussed during the meeting that will help us follow up as staff as well. Okay. So just to run through a couple more resources here, wrapping up with the first portion of the presentation here on the webinar. The NASSP Policy and Advocacy website is a great resource where you can find lots of information on the issues. So in that resource, check out the Learn the Issues pages and position statements for more information on the policies that we'll be discussing. We'd also suggest looking at the POY materials page. So we've put up all the information on there so far about this webinar and the Hill Day that we have. Our professional learning team will also be putting more resources on the materials page coming up here shortly. And this is also where you'll be able to find the draft schedule of events. So I believe Ginny Hodson sent that around to folks earlier, but you'll be able to find a version on this website as well. The NASSP School of Thought blog is another great resource where you'll be able to find blog posts from NASSP staff, principals, and other education policy experts, and other guest authors on some recent education policy issues. So would definitely recommend folks to check out the blog for some of the recent content, and you can kind of see what issues are percolating right now based on what we have in the blog there. We'd also encourage you to follow all of us on Twitter, again, for more real-time updates about what policy is kind of happening in the moment. You can check out all of our Twitter accounts here. Zach, Amanda, and I are constantly tweeting about the issues that matter to principals and educators. So follow us on Twitter for more there. And then finally, you can, of course, check out any of the Congress websites, house.gov, senate.gov, or congress.gov for more information on the members that you'll be meeting with, to kind of have that background prep information that Zach was talking about there. Again, encouraging everybody to continue to be an advocate in the future. We definitely encourage you to sign up for NASSP's Policy and Advocacy Center, where you'll receive our monthly newsletter, action alerts to contact your members of Congress throughout the year on issues that matter to principals and educators, and more information about NASSP's annual advocacy conference. So copy down this link or access it in the PowerPoint when I send that around after the presentation, and make sure you're signed up for our Policy and Advocacy Center. Okay, finally, this is our contact information here. So you don't have to jot this down now. Again, we'll send around the PowerPoint afterwards, but just wanted to make sure folks knew it was there. And now we'll take Q&A on the first portion of the presentation here to see if anybody has questions on the Hill Day, scheduling meetings, setting up meetings and all of that, before we jump into the second half of the webinar where we'll be talking more about policy. So I am just going to go up here and unmute everybody. So give me 1 second while I do that, and we'll see if anybody has any questions. Okay, everybody's line is unmuted. So if anybody has a question, go ahead and shout it. I might have one question in the chat box here. Okay, so Brad from Nebraska says, I assume we can bring more materials to add to that folder that may be more regional or local.
Yeah, that should be perfectly fine, Brad. If you want to add anything to that specifically about your school or anything about what's going on in your region, members are always happy to hear what's going on, more locally. Unfortunately, they aren't able to make policy changes at that level as much, but they often have influence on those people that can. But they're always looking to get more information on what's being done in their locality, in their districts. So it should be perfectly fine.
Another question in the chat box here. Having a difficult time scheduling meetings still. Are you saying you can help make those happen? Still waiting to hear back from the scheduler. Yes, we can definitely make every effort possible to make them happen. So if you have not heard back from the scheduler you've been trying to contact yet or anything like that, please shoot me an email. Again, that's waitwellsg@nassp.org. I can look up some other staff members in that office that we can contact, or Zach or Amanda or I may have a connection in that office, but we can definitely help try and ping somebody else and get that meeting set up. So if you have been having trouble getting in touch with folks, let me know. Please let me know as soon as possible, and we will do everything possible to get a meeting scheduled at that office.
Yeah, and I would just add to that too. If you haven't heard anything back yet, and you just reached out, don't throw the alarm bells yet, unless you've been reaching out consistently. There is still some time left, and some offices won't respond until about 2.5, 3 weeks beforehand. But by that point, we definitely want to get involved. So, as Greg said, though, if you've been really trying to get into an office and you're just not hearing anything, please pass along our way with it.
Yep, and Mark is asking how late or early can we meet on the Hill Day, the 25th? So we had set the times from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. that we would have these meetings take place. So that's the time you should be shooting for. At 5 o'clock. Very important.
That morning time was based on our bus schedule. Depending on what the weather is going to be like on that day that we go to Capitol Hill, we typically have the bus drop us off right in front of the Capitol building, and we try and do a group photo with all of the state principals of the year. So it'd be nice to have everyone included in the photo, but if for some reason, you have a member of Congress having a breakfast or, some other early morning opportunity, you would just need to take alternate transportation to get to Capitol Hill that morning, either Metro or taxi or Uber. So just let us know if that's the challenge, and we can work with you on that.
Another question in the chat box here says, my meetings are not very close together. Is it okay that they're morning and afternoon? Yes, absolutely. So we're only asking folks to send 3 meetings total. That will probably be about a half an hour each for that whole period from 10 to 4. So there is very likely to be a lot of downtime there. You could take a tour of the Capitol, is a good opportunity to do that. So there are public tours that are going to be going all day. You can even work with your member of Congress to set that up, or you can just walk up to the desk right in the Capitol Visitor Center and take a tour of the Capitol. That's one good thing to do. Is lunch on its own?
Yeah, lunch is on your own. All of the Senate office buildings and the Capitol Visitor Center all have cafeterias and coffee shops. Another option is to ask your representative and senators for gallery passes. You can get passes to actually watch the House and Senate in session. And you get those through the office, obviously. And two other options close by is there are tours of the Supreme Court building and also Library of Congress.
Jeff Meisenheimer, Lisa North.
If any of that would be of interest to you.
Hey, good. How are you doing?
Congressional offices and
Good.
get that set up for you.
Yeah, I would highly suggest going through your office to try to get the tours as well. I've posted those out, and they're very happy to help you out with that. It's very simple process to get those for you, and an intern tour is typically usually better than
Another question says, other than the obvious, are there things we should not bring with us? Thinking about a small briefcase. Small briefcase should be fine. You can certainly bring office materials, all of that. Probably not liquids.
Yeah, the Capitol Visitor Center is the only one that has some more prohibitions around food and water bottles, but any of those things, that's fine. But really the congressional office building.
One of the other problems is aerosol sprays for the women for hairspray and things like that. If you go in the Capitol Visitor Center, things like that.
Leave your knives at home, folks. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and remute everybody here, and we're going to continue along with the webinar to talk a little bit more about policy. So just give me 1 second. There we go. Okay, everybody has been muted.
All right, now for the really fun part of the conversation that I like. I'm sure you've all been desperately waiting for it too. The federal education policy and funding portion of the webinar here. So in this part, we're going to dive into a little more what the landscape is for federal education policy right now. Some of the issues we're going to ask all of you to talk about on Capitol Hill, and really just kind of do a brief overview of these issues. I do want to reiterate once again, I'm going to be throwing a pretty good amount of information at everybody right now. Don't worry if you don't all catch it right away. Once again, this is going to be available to you later, and we are going to go through all of these things again in our personal training when you are all here in DC. So we will have time to talk about these things again. Like I said, just do some of your own research on some of them. That will really help you get prepared, and I think make yourselves feel a little more comfortable as we move forward. So first things first, the federal landscape, just kind of going from the top down here. President Trump and Department of Education Secretary Betsy DeVos have now been in office for a year. Some of the priorities for the Trump administration and Congress, the Republican Congress, obviously Republicans have House and Senate right now, has been overhauling the nation's tax code, which they actually successfully did last December, immigration reform, and trying to pass a new infrastructure bill, which was something we had heard about in the beginning, but not hearing as much about now, unfortunately. Looking more closely at education, Congress has actually used the Congressional Review Act to rescind ESSA accountability regulations, including templates for state plans and regulations, governing teacher prep regulations. This has been done by the Department of Education as well to help rescind some of those. Their big rescindances so far have been guidances on Title IX that would have allowed transgender students to use the restroom and locker room corresponding to their gender identity. So really what we're looking at right now is we're seeing Congress and the current Department of Education kind of, I guess, what do we want to say, use some whiteout and do some redo on what the Obama administration has done there. The main issues really dominating conversations in Washington right now, though, we're looking at our school safety, the budget, the budget, the appropriations process, and midterm elections. Obviously, elections are coming up. Members of Congress are all up for a job. Well, not everybody in the Senate, but all House reps are up for a job, and a third of the Senate is up again as well this year. You'll hear a little later in this presentation, Congress is currently working on the budget for FY19 right now, for fiscal year 19. That's going to be a big part of what's going on when all of you are on the Hill, so we'll talk about that a little later. In terms of school safety, the administration has been focusing their efforts on making a new school safety commission and considering putting guns in schools / arming educators, teachers, and school administrators. So that is a really big topic we've been talking about a lot right now. So we'll talk about that a little more later in this presentation as well. Just kind of give everybody a brief overview. The key policy issues we are going to focus on when you are on the Hill is the Higher Education Act, school climate and safety, and then, as I just mentioned, budget appropriations, which we will wrap up the presentation with, because talking about budget numbers is always the most fun thing to do. Let's start off here with the Higher Education Act, though. So now that Congress has been kind of finished with the Every Student Succeeds Act and the Career Technical Education Bill, Congress is now going to turn to another major piece of education legislation, the Higher Education Act, which has been due for reauthorization since 2013. The House Education and Workforce Committee is currently chaired by Representative Virginia Foxx. She's a Republican from North Carolina, and she originally released a bill to reauthorize HEA, Higher Education Act, on December 1, and the committee very quickly held a markup on her bill in December 12th of last year. Now, with that being said, it is not the most popular bill right now. It never actually got to the floor for a vote. There's still talks about it, but it doesn't seem like there is enough support from her party or from others along it within her party to really pass it right now. So we'll talk about that bill in just a little bit. It's actually called the PROSPER Act, which is a really long drawn out acronym that we're not going to go through what that actually means, but we'll talk about that in just a second on the next slide a little more. In July of this year, the Democrats actually released their own Higher Education Act reauthorization bill called the AIM Higher Act. So right now we kind of have two competing bills in the House. And when you look at the Senate is typically more bipartisan in everything it does. So the Senate Help Committee, which is the main committee that deals with education, they actually are kind of holding off right now on doing anything with higher education because they can't find a common ground. So it looks unlikely like we're going to see a Senate Higher Education Act this year, as Chairman Alexander announced earlier this year that him and Ranking Member Murray just can't seem to find common ground right now. So we have kind of a competition in the House and kind of an agreement in the Senate that there's no agreement in the Senate right now. And that's basically kind of where the bills are in the Senate right now. But if we go on to the next slide, we can talk very quickly about the differences between the Democratic and Republican bill in the House. So what we will be asking all of you to do on the Hill is actually asking members to kind of gauge their opinion on the PROSPER Act and asking them to oppose that, and then asking them to support the AIM Higher Act. The reasons for that being the PROSPER Act would overhaul, and once again, this is the Republican bill, this would overhaul the federal student loan system by shifting it to a one grant, one loan system, which can have some detrimental impacts for those trying to go to college and trying to go to post-secondary education. The bill would also eliminate the public service loan forgiveness program for which school leaders are eligible. So I'm not sure if any of you are taking advantage of that now or have taken advantage of that in the past, but that's a very big concern for our organization. And the bill would also eliminate the teacher loan forgiveness program, which we modeled a bill after to propose loan forgiveness for principals. And we'll talk about that principal loan forgiveness bill on the very next slide here. So really, the other main concern with the bill is that it would eliminate all of Title II of HEA, and these are provisions related to teacher and principal preparation. I'm sure all of you are well aware that you need to be well prepared to go into your school and to be, feel like you're ready to do that. And this PROSPER Act really just kind of takes away a lot of the avenues that are there to prepare educators for life in the classroom and life in the school. So that's a really big concern for NASSP, and we're very concerned with that bill doing that. Shifting over to the AIM Higher Act quickly, NASSP actually got to share suggestions with the Democrats before they introduced this bill. So it does include a lot of things that are very positive for school leaders. One is that it would retain teach grants and public service loan forgiveness, the opposite of what the prospect would do. It actually expands the teacher quality partnership grant program so others can qualify and be a participant in that. And it would also improve the oversight of teacher and principal preparation programs. So while these programs are really important, we want to make sure they're being effective. Just to have a prep program isn't enough. We want to make sure that these programs are properly preparing educators, as I said before, for life in the classroom and life in the school. So we have seen some other legislators introduce their own HEA bills. If any of you hear about those and want to have more questions about those, I'm happy to talk with you about them later. But we're going to go into some more just kind of brief views of other bills that aren't full reauthorizations, but other bills that have to do with HEA right now. So the first one we are trying to get reintroduced right now. It is by Rep. Susan Davis, and it is called the Recruiting and Retaining Effective School Leaders Act. So it was introduced last Congress. We are working with our office to introduce it right now. That is why we have yet to have a bill number, but we are working on getting this introduced. So this would actually provide loan forgiveness to principals and assistant principals that work in a low-income school. And we expect Rep. Davis to introduce it this year. We're trying to include language in it from the Democratic substitute amendment that we worked on about increasing teacher loan forgiveness for principals once again. We want, really what we want to, when you guys are talking about this bill, please share your personal story about becoming a school principal. Did you qualify for loan forgiveness? How would loan forgiveness have helped you? Obviously, loan forgiveness is a big thing being talked about right now. If you're still paying back loans, we know that maybe some of you are. Maybe that's why you became an administrator originally, was because you weren't sure if you could pay them all back as a teacher, and you ended up becoming an administrator because of that. We really need those stories in terms of loan forgiveness to really drive that point home. And ask any representative that you meet with to co-sponsor this bill once we have it reintroduced. That's the big ask on this one. When it is introduced, we need co-sponsors. Really want it to be bipartisan. In the past, it has just been a Democratic bill. We are happy to hear from Republicans on some pitches they have to make it better, to improve it, or ways they think will make it stronger. We just really want some more folks to kind of hit the ground running on this bill and help us support it. So this bill is in the process of being reintroduced now, so we'll have more information about an actual bill number and a more thorough, I guess, ask and things like that for you guys once we all arrive in DC, hopefully. The next bill we want to talk about is the Education Preparation Reform Act, which was introduced by Senator Jack Reed, Democrat out of Rhode Island, and Rep. Ruben Cahoon, Democrat out of Nevada. This bill would actually improve accountability for teacher and principal prep programs, which is something we talked about with the AIM Hire Act, by requiring reporting on program features that are related to future success in the classroom. So, for example, that would be admission standards, clinical preparation requirements, and placement, retention, and performance of those that graduate from those programs. So really, once again, principal prep programs and teacher prep programs are so important to ensuring educators are prepared, but we want to make sure they're being effective. We don't want any bad actors in there really kind of mucking it up for everybody else. So this would also allow for teacher quality partnership grants in Title II, would also be expanded to include residency programs for principals, which would be huge, something that we haven't seen in the past. So that's another piece that we would really want included there. So once again, the ask for this bill would be, this bill's already been introduced in the House and in the Senate. It would just be asking them to co-sponsor and support this bill and vote for it should it make it to the floor. But co-sponsors are really important. It really shows support for a bill and can really get it across the finish line to making it to the floor. The next bills we would talk about here, Greg, if we go to the next slide, asking members to co-sponsor the Making Education Affordable and Accessible Acts, which is a bipartisan bill, which actually was introduced in the Senate by Democrat out of Michigan, Gary Peters, and Bill Cassidy out of Louisiana, and John Bozeman in the House, and is a Republican out of Arkansas in the House. So, excuse me, Arizona, my fault, in the House. So, and Rep. Jared Polis and Tom Reed in the House as well. So a lot of co-sponsors on this one already. This is already a bipartisan bill, but we're always looking for more and more co-sponsors. Once again, co-sponsors really show support for a bill, make it really kind of push it forward. This bill would allow institutions of higher education to use their Title VI funding for HEA for dual and concurrent enrollment programs for high school students. So this funding could cover a variety of things, including tuition, fees and books, or other required instructional materials. So this could also be used to provide teachers, principals, and other school leaders professional development activities that enhance or enable the provision of post-secondary coursework through a dual or concurrent enrollment program. So I was reading right from the bill there, if you could not tell, very wordy, but once again, we're not going to actually know these word for word. Really, the goal here is more access to dual and concurrent enrollment programs, which we know really help prepare students for life after secondary education, can kind of get them prepared for that post-secondary education and make sure they're ready for that next step after high school. And actually providing PD for educators to do that, to get better at teaching those programs, only makes them more effective for students. So that's really a big thing that we've been pushing here, and we keep pushing for dual and concurrent enrollment programs, and that's why we're such large supporters of this bill. And the last bill for HE I want to talk about here is actually brand new. If we go to the next slide here, this is the Preparing and Retaining Education Professionals, or the PREP Act, or S3308, which was introduced by Senator Tim Kaine, Senator Tim Kaine. Once again, I know that all these have bill numbers on them. You will have a nice sheet with all these bill numbers on them. So you're not going to need to remember them. Remember the numbers actually directly. What you can actually do is have those there. So NASSP was actually able to provide our own feedback to Senator Kaine's office on this bill. So it actually includes a lot of things that we're very supportive of. Really excited to see Senator Tim Kaine kind of get out in front of this and introduce this bill, especially when his office was so good to work with on this. So the bill actually aims to address teacher and principal shortages. It would broadening the definition of a high-need school district under the Every Student's Disease Act to include rural districts with educator shortages, as well as districts lacking teachers in specific subject areas such as math, science, and English language learners as well. So we're really excited for that. Any bill that addresses teacher shortages, I can't imagine how many of you are dealing with that. Obviously, principal shortages, especially in rural areas, are always a great concern. Encouraging growing your own programs, and these are programs which where districts partner with local community colleges and universities to bolster teacher ranks. So they kind of work together to ensure that teachers are being properly trained and being prepared for that next step. And then they kind of go straight from those colleges or universities into the classrooms. So you're never really facing that moment of, oh, there's no pool of teachers to pull from. There's always a consistent flow of teachers going from the university to the schools. And last but not least, it would actually increase access to high quality teacher and school residency prep programs again. So once again, talking about the importance of prep programs and everything like that. So those are a lot of the things that NASSP actually pitched to Senator Kaine's office to put in the bill. They included a lot of what we had offered, which we were really excited about. So that's another bill that we will be asking you to ask members to co-sponsor, especially on the Senate side, because has not yet been a counterpart has not yet been introduced in the House. So with that, I'm actually going to pass it off to Greg here for a little bit so he can talk about school safety and climate.
Great, thanks, Zach. So as folks are aware, following the terrible mass shooting at Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida earlier this year, the topic of school safety and how do we protect our kids and our buildings and all of you out there working in the field and the profession has been top of mind for all of us here at NASSP and also many members of Congress. And NASSP has developed a set of priorities that we've been advocating behind since the shooting to help keep schools safe. And we have a number of those proposals that we'd love for you to talk about while you're on the Hill. So just to flag a couple of things that have been talked about and debated in Congress since the shooting, banning bump stocks, renewing the assault weapons ban, the Stop School Violence Act, and guns in schools and arming educators have been a few of the issues that have been really rising to the top in terms of what's being discussed on the Hill. So the first one of those that we want to talk about is the Stop School Violence Act. Earlier this year, Congress passed this piece of legislation in the 2018 omnibus, and NASSP supported it and was very active in advocating behind the Stop School Violence Act. This bill provides grant funding for training to prevent student violence against others and themselves, including training for local law enforcement officers, school personnel, and students. And it also provides funding for continued coordination with local law enforcement to help prevent violent incidents in the future. So what would be a good thing to do for this is to do your research in advance and find out if your member or your senator supported the 2018 omnibus, which was HR 1624 5? And if so, thank them for supporting this specific piece of the omnibus, the Stop School Violence Act, and urge them to support other bills that will offer similar opportunities for promoting safe schools and providing the funding necessary to support those type of programs. So it would be a great point to just kind of point out that the Stop School Violence Act was a good first step, but we need more funding and support to really have the kind of impact that we're going to need to keep schools safe across the country. Okay, so in response to the school safety concerns as well, the Trump administration has also offered their own set of suggestions for school safety, and many of those NASSP does not agree with, and I'm sure most of you are in the same boat as well. And the big one among those is arming educators and doing away with gun-free school zones. We are adamantly opposed to this, and we want to be advocating with our members of Congress to oppose any proposal that would arm educators and put guns in schools other than in the hands of specially trained school resource officers. It's our view that those folks are the ones who are trained and prepared to respond to crisis situation, and we shouldn't be asking educators to take up the role of SWAT team members in our schools. So just last week, the New York Times reported that Betsy DeVos is considering diverting critical education funding away from Title IV of the Every Student Succeeds Act to purchase weapons for schools and to arm educators. This is not what Title IV was intended to do. It's intended to benefit the educational experience of students and to give our kids the best chance to learn that they can, not to purchase weapons. So this would be a great example to bring up in your meetings and talk about how these type of policies are short-sighted and ultimately make schools more susceptible to violence and accidents rather than safer from them. Lastly, we would urge you to talk to your members about supporting bills that promote positive mental health supports, like the Mental Health in Schools Act, which is HR 2913 and S 1370, and the Safe Schools Improvement Act. The Mental Health in Schools Act would help bolster the Safe Schools and Healthy Students program by assisting communities in creating comprehensive, evidence-based, trauma-informed services that incorporate strategies of positive behavioral interventions and on-site support in schools. So that's definitely a priority for us here at NASSP. And then the Safe Schools Improvement Act would require that schools implement comprehensive anti-bullying policies that address the bullying and harassment of all students. So that's our suite of materials here that we feel is the best approach to school safety and what we want to be talking to our members about. Now let me kick it over to Zach to jump into a little bit more policy from. Oops, sorry, this is still me, I think, right here. Yeah, my bad. Yeah, one more slide here. So in continuing to talk about school safety. The Framework for Safe and Successful Schools is a resource that NASSP was a co-author of, along with the National Association of School Psychologists, the National Association of Elementary School Principals, and over 100 other education organizations and influencers around the country. And we really feel that this is the unified approach of the education community to the issue of school safety. So many of the recommendations that I just talked about in terms of specific policy are all found within the Framework for Safe and Successful Schools. So this is something you can talk about with your members, you can refer them to, and encourage them to view as they're considering making decisions about school safety policy. I already talked a little bit about the Federal School Safety Commission. So again, Secretary DeVos making that consideration for arming teachers. That's coming out of her Federal School Safety Commission. We are awaiting a final report and set of recommendations from the commission. You know, we had that New York Times report indicating that the arming teachers question is probably part of what they're considering, but it's possible before we have this Hill Day that news may break from this commission about their recommendations. So that may also inform some of your talking points and what you'll say around school safety based on what the commission comes out with. And just finally, a quick point here on our advocacy on school safety. This is an issue that's been very important to us and something we've been very active on. We've done a number of events on the Hill related to school safety since Stoneman Douglas. We've done a number of action alerts, activating all of our members to contact their members of Congress, because we feel there's really nothing that could be more important than the safety of our students and our buildings and all of you principals and teachers and educators working in the field. So it's been a huge priority for us. And we hope to continue to make it so moving forward. And now I'll kick it back to Zach.
So now for everybody's favorite part, federal budget and appropriations. So if you didn't remember all those bill numbers and everything like that, you're going to love this part, because now I'm just talking numbers and bills. And no, I'm just kidding. But now we're just talking about numbers for appropriations. So we actually go to the next slide. I want to start off with a quick differentiation here about politics. And I mean, I guess just the terms on Capitol Hill, which are really important to know when we're talking about appropriations. So in authorization, I'm going to read this word for word just so people, I know it's on there, but just so people can see the difference. An authorization creates a specific program through federal law. An authorization bill acts as a prerequisite for an appropriation or other kinds of budget authority. Appropriations provide the actual amount of federal dollars to a specific program. Congress needs to pass appropriations bills each year for the operations and programs run by the federal government. So really, when you're saying, whenever you see a bill that authorizes a program, we'll use a number at, let's say, $5 million. That's the number it can be funded at. Now, when appropriations comes along, it may be funded at $2.5 million. It may be funded at $100,000. So when we're talking about authorizations and appropriations, that's the difference. Just because something's authorized at a level doesn't mean it's going to get that level. Each year, Congress has to determine what that funding level is going to be. So right now, we are going through that appropriations process. So really what we're going to talk about a lot here is the authorization levels of a lot of programs and in the Every Student Succeeds Act, like Title II, like Title IV, who are actually authorized at a higher level than they're being appropriated. The reason things are authorized at certain levels typically is because that's what the amount of money we think is needed for those programs to be effective. So when they're appropriated at less than their authorized level, they're not as effective as they should be. So I want you all to keep that in the back of your minds here as I start to go through some of these programs and just kind of give a brief overview of what they're really doing here, what the programs are, and kind of what we're looking at right now. So we can go to the next slide here real quick. Before I do that, I'm just going to give kind of an overview of what the FY 2019 appropriations process is, or what we're looking at right now. So President Trump signed the FY 2018 appropriations bill in March of this year. He really should have, that was supposed to be done by October of last year. So we were way behind this year. So FY 19 has been kind of crunched this year. Time has been really limited. The budget caps deal that was completed on February 8th of last year, of this year, actually raised the spending caps for this year to $69 billion. So there was some more money to play around with a little bit than there was in the past. President Trump had his own budget. Obviously, each president comes up with their own budget. His included $65 billion in cuts to non-defense discretionary spending. So you can see that non-defense spending is really not a priority for his administration, which isn't super shocking, I'm sure, to anybody. I'm sure we've seen the numbers that he really is supportive of defense. But this also included a $3.6 billion or 5.4% cut for the Department of Education, and the elimination of some of the most important programs the NASSP really sees, like Title II, which is used to provide professional development for teachers, principals, and other school leaders. So we're hoping to avoid any sort of elimination like that, but also hoping to avoid another spending package after he signed FY 18's. President Trump came out and said that he would not sign another one, and that if there was another spending package, he may try to shut down the government. So the House and Senate are now working on passing all 12 appropriations bills this Congress to send to the president one at a time to have him sign. They've been working very diligently on this. The Senate has been working through August on this, which is typically recess for them on this nominations. But this has really been the closest they've gotten in a really long time to getting this done. With that being said, Congress has until October 1 to actually finish all these bills. That's the end of fiscal year 18. The chances that they get that done is very unlikely. Now, I'm sure most of you notice October 1 is literally right before you come out here. So there will be talks about appropriations while you are on the Hill. That's why it's so important that all of you go and speak about the importance of these programs and what funding level you think they should be at, because you will be here right when the fire is getting hot, so to say, of when these things are actually going down here. So what will most likely happen is that Congress will pass a short-term continuing resolution, which will just keep the funding of the government level until about Christmas. That's what they do every year. But still, this is a golden opportunity for you to get here when this appropriations process is really heating up. And you can say, these programs are important to me, my faculty, my school, and my students. Here's why we need these dollars. So if we go on to the next slide here, we can kind of look at the funding levels that our programs received in FY18. So Title I grants, obviously for low income students, this received $15.76 billion. In FY18, I think I actually have the SE, and I do have the SE authorized levels on the next slide as well, so you can kind of compare numbers here. Title II Part A, as I just mentioned, which is used for professional development for teachers and principals, received $2.1 billion. If we look next, we have the School Leader Recruitment and Support Program, which received no dollars. That has officially been eliminated in both the House and the spending bill. The Literacy Education for All Research Results for the Nation, or LEARN as it is now known, received $190 million. And then Title IV, which Greg had mentioned before, which is used to support well-rounded education, safe and healthy schools, or the effective use of technology in schools, is a giant block grant program that was formed under ESSA, received only $1.1 billion. So these are all the FY18 numbers. Now, if we go to the next slide, we can actually see the authorized funding levels for these. So if you look at Title I grants, that's actually about even. If you look at Title II Part A, it's actually receiving about $200 million less than it was authorized. So once again, with that smaller amount of funding, it's not going to be as effective as it should be. And Title II is a really unique program that is really probably one of the most important programs to NASSP because it was actually almost completely eliminated in the House bill last year. So we were really concerned about it this year. It got level funding this year, which we're happy about, but still, it's not going to be, I guess, as effective as possible until it gets that authorized level of funding. So we need to really go into these offices and say, hey, 2.1 billion isn't bad, but it's not where it was supposed to be under ESSA. So we really need to bump that funding up. School Leader Recruitment Support, that program that was eliminated, is a $15 million program. That's what was its authorized level, which I know to many of us sounds like an astronomical amount of money. It really is not that much for Congress. So we need to pitch that again. That 15 million is not a ton, especially when you look at the broad education budget, especially if you look at defense spending. 15 million is not a ton of money there. Learn is at 190 million. So that one was actually pretty much the same there, which is good. But once again, though, just because it was the same last year doesn't mean it will be the same this year. So for FY 2019, we need to keep pushing that. Just because 190 million was funded level, we need to keep pushing that forward of, hey, this is still a really important program. Let's keep this funding level moving forward. We still really need that. And last but not least, student support and academic enrichment grants, or Title IV. It is authorized at 1.65 billion. It only received 1.1 billion last year. So that one's pretty far off as well, just like Title II. So we're really never going to see. And originally, that program was actually supposed to be able to provide a minimum of 10,000 to each district that qualified for it. And now, because it's not at that authorized level, it's not able to receive that minimum of 10,000, which I'm sure most of you know that 10,000 goes a long way, but if you can only receive a small amount of it, is it even that effective for you in the end? That's kind of the problem there. And then,
sir, next slide.
Yep. Okay. And then when we move on to the next slide here, just a couple other small programs we wanted to highlight. IDEA state grants, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act grants, received 12.3 billion in FY18. So obviously those are always too low. We're not going to see the 40% that's supposed to be at for quite a while. So keep asking for an increase in those funds. And career and technical education state grants were funded at 1.19 billion. Those programs actually seemed like they were a really big push for the Trump administration originally, but then they actually went back and tried to cut them later. So we really are fighting an uphill battle in terms of education spending right now. And it's not going to stop anytime soon, but that's why we need the voices of practitioners like yourselves going up there, highlighting these programs, sharing your own personal stories of, here's what this program helped me with. Maybe Title II helped you with something, or maybe you have an idea of what you could do something with Title IV. Maybe you want to do a certain drug prevention program that Title IV dollars should go towards, but you won't be able to do it unless it gets that authorized level of funding. That's really something to keep in mind when you go to the Hill and kind of discuss these things. So please keep that in mind when you're talking about these dollars. We will have these numbers for you, like I said before, on a nice printout. It's a one-sheet piece of paper, front and back, that you'll be able to see that will be really helpful for you to kind of go over these numbers with your members. But just something for you to think about ahead of time when you're talking about that these aren't just dollars and cents, that these are actual programs and these actually fund advancements for students and for educators. That's really something that we need to kind of highlight for members of Congress while you're all there.
Great. Okay. And just to add on to Zach's point, again, we will be doing a full training, reiterating some of these issues when you're here in DC. And we are available to talk if folks have questions about the policy that we've discussed. And just on the screen here to re-highlight some of the resources that we talked about earlier. All these links will be available in the PowerPoint presentation we'll send around, but we definitely encourage folks to check out some additional pre-reading materials at these various links here before you come to DC, so you are as versed as possible by the time you get here. And then lastly, one more pitch to sign up for the NASSP Policy and Advocacy Center, so the link can be found there again. Again, our contact information is included here. And finally, we'll take one more Q&A at the end here. So I know we're getting close to the end, but let me go ahead and get folks unmuted again if anybody has any final questions.
On day one.
Okay, everybody is now unmuted, folks. So
enough of the, we get to school.
Somebody's got a little background noise, but if anybody has a question, go ahead and shout it out now.
But no,
in the chat box.
But we love her. So get your ass to school.
You're in the chat box.
Don't see any. Okay, seeing none.
Do we want to play some music while we're coming in?
Hold on a second.
It is.
Okay, great. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much for joining our webinar today. Yeah, it's, oh, we do have one question in the chat box, sorry. Yep. Sorry, we have a question from Warman Hall here. If we have a spouse joining us on the trip, are there any details related to them possibly joining us in the Capitol Hill meetings that we need to consider? Yes, you can definitely have your spouse join you in those meetings. It would just be a good best practice to let the offices know that your spouse will be joining you and what their name is. So just give the offices a heads up that they'll be joining you. But yeah, we often have POYs bring their spouses to these events and to take the pictures together with the senators and representatives and everything, and also to participate in the policy discussions. They're a great resource you can have in there as well, and it's always helpful to conduct a meeting when you have somebody else in there. So, so we definitely encourage you to do that. Just be sure to give those offices a heads up. David is asking, who can we request a gallery pass from? So your member of Congress is probably the best person there. So if you're conducting that meeting while you're in the office, would be a good time to ask for it. Or if you have time in the morning, just head over to your congressional representative is probably going to be the best person in the House. So stop in and let them know you're the POY and you probably have a meeting scheduled later that day, or if it's when you're conducting the meeting, you could just ask then. But just ask them if you can get a gallery pass and they should be able to help you out with that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they'll send them in the mail, but you could always check in advance as well.
Yeah, they should. They typically don't send them in the mail, I know, but really they typically, they literally get like $2.50 at a time, and they just keep them in like the staff assistant's desk. So it's a really good way to close out a meeting if you say, hey, can I also grab a gallery pass? And then they should give them to you right there typically.
So maybe have the policy priorities be the 1A ask and then the gallery pass the 1B. That's a good way to stack that.
For whatever reason you can't find them, I'll get you some.
Any other questions for the before we wrap up here? Feel free to type them into the chat box. Going once, going twice, and just remember, folks, we are available for follow-up afterwards. So feel free to shoot us any follow-up questions that you have about scheduling meetings, the Google document, or anything related to the Hill Day coming up for POY. We are very excited to see all of you next month and to make a difference on Capitol Hill together, and meeting with your members of Congress. So thank you once again very much for joining our webinar here, and we'll see you all next month.
Thank you, everybody.